Dog, I'm not even a fan, and I can tell she is a poser who just uses the trans and drag community to prop herself up and doesn't actually care what happens because it doesn't directly affect her. Be for real.
I just told you a little while ago, these leaders that they call leaders, this included Lena Horne.
What have seen? Huh? What have seen, for example, is she used the drag community for her creativity and music performances. However, it seems to people in the community she didn't educate herself on it and only used the art. She has not spoken out for trans/drag rights since the Trump administration came into office, but was active in calling against Biden. This is the frustration people are feeling.
This included Dick Gregory, and this included comedians, comics, trumpet players, baseball players. Show me in the white community where a comedian is a white leader. Show me in the white community where a singer is a white leader, or a dancer or a trumpet player is a white leader. These aren't leaders. These are puppets and clowns that have been set up over the white community and over the black community by the white community and have been made celebrities and usually say exactly what they know that the white man wants to hear.
But if I'm not mistaken, her debut was surrounded and supported by her political views. Like, she made it a point to make a public stand. So I think the public is doing for consistency. Don't do like the politicians and say what you need to get in office and switch. Sorry. Don't do like the politicians and say what you need to get in office, then switch up when you get there.
Okay, so.
Man! What did he do to make them niggas that mad?
Recently, Chappell Roan went on the Call Her Daddy podcast and said,
expect me to play by different rules because I'm gay and I should be more politically correct about that and I should actually be way more knowledgeable about it. And so I get asked a lot of fucking crazy questions that a lot of my peers would not get asked. And that's because I'm gay. And that's because like, I have like my opinions, but that doesn't mean I'm like completely, like, I don't know everything about every topic I have opinions on. Like, I don't know everything about like being gay. Like, I don't know everything about being a woman. I don't know everything about fashion or drag or performing. Like, I try to know everything I can, but like when I don't answer a question correctly or like I don't acknowledge one community, it's like, how can I do it all? Like,
you can't.
How can these girls tour, write, perform, interview, sleep, eat and work out, and like how can they do it all and lead a team and be a boss and pay people and like and be like so politically educated? It's
exhausting.
And it's also impossible. Also, why the f are you looking to me for some political answer? You think I have the f***ing answer?
But you're like, listen to my song, bitch. Turn it up.
Like, I'm a pop star. I wish I had the answers. I wish the president was a pop star, but she's not.
this wasn't really that big of a deal for me. I don't really follow what she does that heavy, but in regards to interpreting these words, they seem to fall in line with what we already knew, or at least what I already knew. Do I believe that she's abandoning the values that made her famous in the first place? Not really. And in fact, I think the backlash to these statements go far deeper than she said something wrong again. So let's get into it. But first, hi, hello, how are you? I'm Square Symbols, an independent musician who looks to bridge the gap between music, art, culture, and politics. I'm extremely fortunate to have been able to travel and work as a musician, so I feel like that specific lens gives me a little more insight in regards to this controversy specifically. And if you vibe with my stuff or anything that I make sure to let me know in the comments below. Like the video, share it if you feel like it, and if you want to support my work, consider joining my Patreon. There you can get access to stuff like this early, your name in the credits, and access to some exclusive stuff I don't post here, like live performance footage and instrumental or drum tracks from a large amount of archived drum stuff I've done in the past, or vids that may have some spicier takes. But with that, let's get into it. For the uninitiated, Kaylee Rose Amstutz, known professionally as Chappell Roan, is a pretty newly famous singer-songwriter. Although she's been active since the mid-2010s, her early efforts were met with a certain amount of consistent rejection. As with anyone, it's a slow grind to break through. And after being dropped by her label at the time, Atlantic Records I believe, in 2020, she worked a series of odd jobs before reuniting with her collaborator Dan Nigro, opening for Olivia Rodrigo, and eventually breaking through in late 2023 and early 2024. She made plenty of waves, mainly because she's not like the other girls, quote unquote, in that she's openly queer and sings about her queer experiences. She tends to speak off the cuff and not in a corporate manufactured type way. She also donated a portion of her ticket sales to a Black trans-led organization. She refused to play the White House last year out of solidarity for trans and oppressed people in occupied territories. And upon winning a Grammy, she used her acceptance speech to advocate for a living wage for musicians, as well as healthcare.
I told myself if I ever won a Grammy and I got to stand up here in front of the most powerful people in music, I would demand that labels and the industry profiting millions of dollars off of artists would offer a livable wage and healthcare, especially to developing artists.
With a spotlight on developing artists specifically. One can say she also puts her platform where her mouth is. Well, there's a better way to say that. But my point is that she has drag performers open her shows, which is pretty cool for queer up-and-comers of many disciplines. So with that said, is her going on a podcast to lament about her newfound exasperation of being so many things to so many people, a pure entitled betrayal to her fan base and everything she's initially stood for, or just going off of good faith, with good faith meaning an overarching concept for being open and honest in negotiations that go beyond the idea of not deceiving the other party. So in good faith, I understood these statements both as Chappell Roan firmly stating that she's trying to keep up, but it's hard for her to know everything, and her decentering herself in conversations regarding the marginalized group she's a part of specifically. Put plainly, and this may just be my opinion based on being in community with other queer folks for a while, but someone saying it's impossible for them to know everything about the queer experience, the lesbian experience, the gay experience is important, because queer existence isn't monolithic. However, that's not to take away a lot of folks within the media sphere, or, well, not the media sphere specifically. I'd say just people on TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram took away from those statements. So let's go over these criticisms and see how she ruffled some feathers. I guess that could count as a drag joke. I want to start this by saying, as a queer person who loves to dance, Chappell Roan is low-key outside of my social sphere. Outside of my algorithm, to be clear. Like, if I'm thinking about what I listened to in 2024, the kind of summer I had, and what I heard from the DJs that I fuck with specifically via attending dance parties, I can honestly say that I missed the whole hot to go dance and brat summer thing. But why? By and large, queer spaces are still very segregated. Also, I'm kind of old, but we'll get into that later. But in regards to the pop girlies and what queer spaces look like to me, a person who's in community with Black and brown queer creatives here, my niggas don't really spin that stuff. Stuff like Charlie XCX or Chappell Roan or Sabrina Carpenter just don't reach my orbit specifically. What also deserves some attention is that last summer niggas were indeed dropping. Besides the huge moments that the Kendrick and Drake beef had offered, there were a myriad of incredible hip-hop releases of that year. We also have Kaytranada drop probably one of my favorite dance records, and the Doechii mixtape near the end of the summer, and Tyler the Creator dropping in the fall. So there was plenty of music for me to listen to. Add to that, white queer folks tend to take up a lot of space in music scenes and organizing or event spheres, while often not checking their inherent biases, which obviously leads to a litany of microaggressions or outright racism at worst. Sadly, gay men are the largest perpetrators of this, with rampant fat phobia, crusty black sense, and a weird extractive energy in regards to blackness while choosing to be super ignorant in regards to our issues, or not even making room for us in gay spaces to begin with. The white queer femmes and non-binary spaces aren't really that much better. Generally, what you're left with is a room full of well-meaning but culturally detached white folks who don't really listen to Black artists, like at all. Which, first off, is alarming, and second, very unseasoned. But because of that, they aren't really familiar with the gender, play, and funk associated with a straight prince. the queer celebratory force that was Sylvester, or the bouncy goth new wave vibes of an artist like Q Lazarus. Add to that, there are a lot of modern queer black artists that they just don't listen to. The aforementioned Kate Renata, who's been leading and innovating the dance music sphere for more than a decade now. The hardworking so-called newcomer Doechii, who's been open about her bisexuality, and thankfully embraced by both a black and mixed queer audience, kinda. More on that later. My city's own Duran Bernard, a master collaborator and R&B tour de force, charting new land creatively while being an absolute sweetheart. Iniko, whose unique phrasing and radically compassionate sound continues to make so many waves in an industry full of carbon copy folks playing it safe. And let's not forget Kalila, whose 2023 album Raven still stays in my weekly rotation. Niggas continually make good shit, is my point. But even with these statements, because of the strange energy white queer spaces have for black and brown folks, these spaces, at the very least within my personal experience, have always been segregated. And generally, it's mostly been a safety thing, with white queers not willing to, at the very least, cede a level of spatial control and leadership to black and brown folks, leading to spaces that may or may not have unseasoned music and a collection of gym bros or white queers who kind of view the way that black folks speak to each other as very aggressive or loud.
Like, my experience has been unique because I grew up in punk and hardcore too, and those are generally, unfortunately, segregated as well. So the queer folks in those environments were overwhelmingly white, and because environments are usually split, like, I enjoy going to black and brown queer parties way more because I can put my guard down, and there's not this assumption of my straightness in black and brown spaces. That happens to me all the time in white queer spaces. Like, for instance, I had a friend who was like we're not friends anymore, but at the time they were doing passive aggressive like jokes towards me every time we hung out, because they never saw me like hook up with any of our friends or anything like that. But like, I personally don't date white queer people. Like, I'm attracted to black people, so I date black queer people, and I'm like, the reason why you never saw me with anyone is because you don't go to the same clubs that I do, you don't date the same people that I do. So instead of assuming that I'm like A, hiding my sexuality, or B, am straight, or like, cosplaying queerness, realize that it shows up differently for different people, and it shows up differently racially because of segregation. You know what I mean? Like, it's pretty obvious to me, but I feel like it might be harder for people to understand that because it's easy to be in your own bubble, Because of this, black people create their own spaces, and it's been like that since I've been out. Like, the white queers don't know or respect culture enough for us to feel safe, and that bleeds loosely into our choice of pop girlies. With that said, this isn't a problem directly caused by Chappell Roan or unique to her specifically. Like, more power to her, and if we're keeping it a buck, this has more to do with who the industry puts money behind than anything else. It's been like that for decades. So what are folks actually criticizing her for? That's not really what I got from her statements. I can personally see her as a human approaching burnout in the eternal content machine, with the labor imposed upon her as a brand reaching new heights where her safety and privacy are regularly compromised. But let's seriously interrogate this. From my point of view, stating that she's trying makes it clear that she's not done speaking up. Add to that, seeing her be one of the only ones actually standing on business right now makes that clear. And we can chill on the weird argument of her using queer culture to get famous when she's out streaming motherfuckers to begin with. A song went viral on TikTok, popped off with queer femmes, and she was already touring. It's a lot of thought and effort into her performances, etc., etc. As a working artist, it doesn't take much to notice that building a brand, keeping a high performance standard, and getting a little lucky is generally how a lot of folks attain fame. Well, some people. In regards to her using queer culture, I don't really see it. Like, yes, she calls her high quality costuming drag as a way to show respect, but let's not be super rigid with what we call drag and what isn't drag. Like, be honest, many musicians use elaborate costuming in their live performances. Do we accuse them of using queer aesthetics? And sure, she refers to it as drag to actually give respect and credence to the queer costumers and professionals that shaped theater and live performance culture as we know it.
But don't get it twisted. This is something that is actually pretty industry normative. This seems intellectually dishonest as a critique. She's also an entire queer person. Like, she moves through life as an openly queer woman. So yeah, weird point. Let's move on. While to an extent I'd agree with this, folks in privileged positions should contribute more in the struggle for liberation. They should work to uplift marginalized voices and speak truth to power. With that said, she seems to be one of the only big names actively speaking about Palestine, musician labor rights, and healthcare. Hell, even more than our elected officials. And this gets to the root of the public's problems with her. This whole controversy, the twisting of words, the relentless hate campaign, the lack of charitability is just election get-back content. You see, during the heated campaign between our two awful choices, corporate lying genocider or deranged unhinged genocider, Chappell made the mistake of stating that this was indeed fucked up. Even though she stated that she'd be voting for the lesser of two evils, that wasn't enough for the myriad of folks who are captured by the status quo, and felt like her saying both sides bad caused active harm to queer folks, instead of the reality that, indeed, both sides are bad. But I can hear the folks tippity-typing away in my comments, saying things like Kamala wouldn't have done the awful things that Trump did, alluding to her as the beacon of preserving the rights of Americans against the current fascist administration. And I really want to dig into this.
Like that, do I? A little bit. Now, Kamala, take my Pamela.
Election get-back content or fuck around and find out content refers to the joy and giddiness liberals feel after the Orange administration does whatever new human rights abuses of the day.
Oh my goodness. All the election get back content I'm getting on my For You page, just people who have anger, but they don't know where to put it, but they're just repeating and saying the same things over and over that people are, like, someone, say it's a popular Democrat influencer, and they're like, we should blame the left, and then for the next, I don't know, it's been since January we've been dealing with this, not even November we've been dealing with this. They keep saying the same talking points over and over to everyone, which is why I personally think it's kind of like a psyop or something. I think from up top, especially since Kamala was like, I hate to say I told you so, but I told you so, which is like the most patronizing, tone-deaf thing ever, I personally think. But I think from the top, like DNC, people like that are so upset that we pointed out their hypocrisy, like the left pointed out their hypocrisy, that they want us to be like, I don't know, socially annihilated? Not like, maybe not really annihilated, maybe some of them, but I think social annihilation, because it's just absolute insanity to me that they're still saying the same things. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't seem like there isn't any self-reflection whatsoever, and like people are just looking for blood right now, you know? I don't know how else to describe it. It's like very emotionally jarring.
It's there as a self-solace, or cope if you will, after the extremely embarrassing loss Kamala Harris suffered at the hands of Donald Trump last fall. All of those annoying leftists who brought up the fact that the Biden-Harris administration continued to indiscriminately send bombs that would go on to be used on literal children, like babies, as well as non-combatant men and women, so the proxy spy state can expand. Well, now these annoying leftists have to deal with the consequences of speaking out. You know, like being disappeared, jailed, without due process, all of these things. It's not like the actual voter data suggests that, by and large, Trump won because he spoke to a white voter base more. Or maybe Kamala running an 04 George W. Bush campaign wasn't a good idea. No, it's leftists who care about children and don't want their tax money to be used to kill babies. It's their fault. It's the fault of the entertainers who also saw these man-made horrors on their phones and dared to speak up about it. It's not like these political structures have very consistent, interconnected frameworks, meaning that the shit that they do to folks abroad happens to us too eventually. It's not like Palestine is the testing grounds of police that make queer spaces and black spaces unsafe for most marginalized folks in our communities. Israelis also use US tax money to invest in some of the grossest spyware that's now used to hinder organizers here in the States, acting as if this is just a single issue that can be ignored until we get our rights, exemplifies the true lack of empathy Americans seem to be falling into that got us to this level of upfront fascism in the first place. There's no such thing as those people over there when they're stealing from us to harm other people. It's just that simple. But suppose I'm taking your criticism seriously. How have the Dems been on queer rights lately? From my vantage point, as an Ohioan, I witnessed both Democrat and Republican senators hurl transphobic campaign ads against each other, centering trans kids in sports as a moral battleground when, in reality, it is the biggest nothing burger of all time. All the while, Harris remained pretty vague in regards to how she'd actually help the trans community specifically. Outside of saying she'd follow the law in regards to trans rights, like, what does that even mean? It's almost as if she's aware that there's been anti-trans legislation that's been on the books since 2022 and prior. Wouldn't it make sense to take a definitive stance on protecting trans rights? So if Kamala couldn't actually say that she will adamantly fight against anti-trans legislation, why is she the beacon of trans rights? Or at best, the preventative measure between queer folks and the barrage of hate that we're currently experiencing? Okay, let me chill. It's not like Kamala Harris is an active threat to poor trans folks. Oh, wait. In the mid-2010s, Harris aggressively backed SESTA FOSTA, legislation that had extremely adverse effects for those who participated in S work. Now I know what you're thinking. What does that have to do with trans people, by and large? Well, sadly, due to protected rights not being a thing, meaning folks can and have openly discriminated against queer and trans people, and with said discrimination leading to a lack of housing and employment opportunities for trans people, that means liberal rights speaking Kamala Harris does indeed have active ties to legislation that negatively affected many poor or struggling trans folks. Let me bridge a few gaps. FOSTA SESTA refers to the Allow States and Victims to Fight Online S-Trafficking Act and Stop Enabling S-Trafficking Act, which I know, like, yes, humans shouldn't be trafficked against their will for sure. Everyone can agree on that. But if we're keeping it a buck, if these rich elected officials actually cared about trafficking individuals, then both Donald Trump and the Clinton camp wouldn't have active ties to human trafficker Jeffrey Epstein, now would they? What this legislation did do is dismantle online spaces for S workers that they used to properly screen and secure their clients, ergo putting their lives in danger. Why is this important? Well, according to the data, LGBTQ plus youth have a 120% higher risk of experiencing some form of homelessness. And as we mentioned, due to a lack of mobilization and a specific queer affirmative attitude towards queer rights, it's legal to discriminate against trans and queer people, hence these queer folks not being able to secure a steady job. How do you expect them to support themselves? It's not surprising that queer folks fall back on S work to support themselves. And since due to the government surveillance and targeted legislation, this work isn't safe. Guess who's adversely harmed by said legislation? And this isn't a rare occurrence. Like, I'm not saying every queer person who's fallen upon hard times has resorted to doing S work, but that S work is constantly a viable option for queer folks experiencing financial hardships. And with a whopping 28% of LGBTQ plus youth reporting housing insecurity or homelessness, advocating for legislation that harms those S workers actively harms queer folks by proxy, especially those on a lower socioeconomic ladder. But again, we're not single issue voters here. We can look at the other issues that make Kamala a beacon of trans and queer rights, can't we? Like, maybe she advocated for breaking healthcare monopolies, large companies that not only keep my queer friends from receiving affordable everyday things like fucking insulin, like gender affirming care. Oh wait, her plan was to vaguely expand the Affordable Care Act we currently use, an act that centers quality healthcare being provided by employers, if you're lucky. Meaning gender affirming care is still privatized, or in the arms of those who have high paying jobs. Yep, that's right, healthcare for trans people, but only if you are a part of the class that can afford it. Like, I can't stress this enough. It's wild that folks have this much smoke for Chappell Roan when she actively spoke up for folks getting healthcare in her industry, when Kamala Harris actively worked against a single-payer healthcare system. Or to put it plainly, a healthcare system in which the government insures the people. Like, she don't really vibe with universal healthcare, is my point. And not having universal healthcare affects who? Again, the trans folks who need gender affirming care. It guns up the works and makes us, the people, have to actively battle with our healthcare insurers who work with doctors and pharmaceutical companies to screw us out of our money. Like, I'm serious. Any politician going forward doesn't deserve your vote if they're looking to privatize healthcare, a thing our government can definitely afford and just chooses not to. And before one of you weak-spined losers get in my comments raising random useless questions, I'm gonna just hit you with this fact. If you are a breathing person, you deserve adequate health care and to have your needs accommodated, whether I agree with you politically or not.
I always go back to the fact that, like, we are technically in an abusive relationship with the government. And when marginalized communities, specifically queer communities, are, like, trying to, like, adhere to liberalism or, like, adhere to the system, is because they think they have to suffer in order to be accepted, because they learned that somewhere else, right? Especially because this is supposed to be the progressive party, right? And they're still only merely tolerating us as queer people. So if you grow up thinking, it just reminds me of, like, growing up in Christianity and hearing queer Christians being like, well, God knows my heart, and, like, hate the sin, love the sinner, that type of stuff. That, when people say that, they think it sounds good, but when you really unpack that, that means you just are barely tolerating me. And that's resentment. And that's, like, what the Democratic Party is giving us, is resentment. It's like, here, damn, fine, take some rights, you know, like they barely want to give us, any rights. And I think the reason why so many queer people are doing it, it's because it's the good cop, bad cop thing, right? The Republican is like, I want to kill you. The Democrat's like, fine, I guess you can, you know what I mean? Like, not realizing that both parties are telling us that we have no value, but they're saying it in two different ways. So I think that's why, and honestly, unfortunately, I think pink capitalism and queer capitalism did a number on our people. Yeah. Because when you go to a Pride Fest, what do you see? You see a TD Bank float with the fucking rainbow flag on it. You see the NYPD drive with their wrapped rainbow cars. They do that for Pride. They have, like, rainbow cars that it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. So people see that and they think that there's more social acceptance than probably than there actually is, you know, or like a tolerance. It just, I mean, representation in general has people fucked up.
So, if trans people don't have access to the doctors or treatment that they need, they'll just use DIY frameworks, which, yeah, is risky, but what are their actual options or choices? So Kamala wasn't really doing much unless you're a part of the queer moneyed class. But we can keep it a buck. She's just a cog in a larger machine. We truly want to believe that there are two opposing sides, constantly working against each other to fine-tune our democracy, but if we're being honest in this regard, we can all see through that. The Democrats have been moving rightward, doing as little as possible to maintain support from the marginalized, and I've witnessed this my entire life and beyond. So what's wrong with Chappell Roan pointing that out? I mean, maybe it's because I'm old, but I witnessed the red team manhandle the blue team my entire life. They've always controlled the narrative, while the Dems always work overtime to meet them halfway for some reason. The 80s saw the Reagan administration be tough on crime and enforcing a hands-off government policy, which is really just an excuse to over-police and incarcerate Black and brown people, while cutting government assistance for those in need. And what did the Clinton administration do in the 90s? Continue harsh sentencings for Black and brown people and target government assistance programs. The 2000s saw the Bush administration use fear as a tool to limit our individual freedoms and privacy, as well as weaponize xenophobia to invade the Middle East for resources, with the following Democratic administration continuing that trend. To an extent, we have the first Trump term piggybacking off of Obama's high deportation rates. And what's so wild about the first Trump term, which did indeed suck, is we have Joe Biden thrown one of the easiest alley-oops in presidential history. Do a one-term type beat, maybe invest in education. You had a lot of us with the forgiving student loans thing. Maybe sprinkle in some COVID checks and let us chill. But man's biffed it so hard, spending hella money on the police and working to build more cop cities around the US, deporting more people, shutting down strikes, failing to move the needle in healthcare at all, refusing to codify abortion rights, trans rights, or even the easy shit like classifying well-known domestic terrorist hate groups as actual hate groups. Instead, we get more money from us taxpayers going to fund Israel. Also, we can see more shredded children on our phones. And possibly the worst part, he tried to run for president again instead of letting us actively play a part in the electoral process with a primary. Like, I don't fuck with Kamala at all, but I can honestly say that the actions of Joe Biden is a huge part of what got us here currently. He deserves so much more smoke, and no one seems to be holding his ice cream eating ass responsible. Except for Ang. This is a very good video.
Scary, especially since it didn't work the first time. I mean, if we want to talk about stolen elections, we could definitely bring up Bush.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, he was only popular because of 9/11. Like, pre 9/11, I remember because I was like the nerdy kid that watched the news with my uncle and like my dad and my mom. So I remember watching the news, and Bush was pretty unpopular, like during his campaign and everything. And then 9/11 happened, and then he became the guy. Same thing with Giuliani, like. Especially me being the New Yorker, I remember that. Like, we hated Giuliani. We blamed everything on him because, much like today, he was a corrupt politician. And then 9/11 happened and things changed. So I feel like the Democrats thought that they could manufacture our consent in the same way. And we're upset that it didn't work. It's like, I said this on a TikTok recently, though. It's like, it was much easier to control the populace before the internet. Like, we know each other now. We can talk to each other, and like, you can't control the narrative. If I see with my own two eyes what's happening, and so does someone else. So if I'm confused, I could literally be like, yo, Dante, do you see what I'm seeing? And you're like, yeah, fam, we both are seeing it. Like the Medea meme, like, you see me, I see you. Like, they don't like that. So inevitably, like, when you can't control a populace and capitalism, fascism happens. And yeah, with the Democrats, that's what's really jarring to me. The fact that they were like going out of their way to like promote like Liz Cheney, that Bill Clinton went to Michigan and shamed people. Like, it just seems so out of touch and like very patronizing. And I think it's like the nail in the coffin for them, but they're doubling down. So we'll see. I don't know what's happening.
That's my main point, and the reason for this long-winded political rant is that I view the American electoral system not as two opposing sides, but as two teams masquerading as opposing sides when, in reality, they're just the same thing in different fonts. What's most important is that, be it red or blue, they could give a shit about us, especially in regards to our personal safety. But with that said, participation in the process is important. Let's just not dogpile people who call out how actively shitty our electoral process is. Okay, so if we can surmise or understand that Chappell Roan has some solid frustration with how politics in this country works, why is the world on her shoulders in regards to having the right takes all the time and whatnot? And why would her voicing frustration over not knowing everything and stressing about getting everything right be morphed into a strange tale of white feminist victimization? Let's dig a little bit deeper.
I'm constantly trying to remember, like, okay, you have to chase your goals, but you got to check in with your mom. You got to make sure your sisters are okay. You got to make sure your bills are paid, but you got to make sure you have fun and time for you, time for your friends. And, like, I'm just constantly feeling like I'm neglecting parts of my life.
So upon first hearing the Call Her Daddy clip, this is immediately what I thought of. Alligator Bites Never Heal was one of my favorite projects from last year. And this track stood out to me because it's sandwiched between tracks that highlighted her vulnerability, but also give the listener a chance to breathe and take in this journey that we've been on with Doechii so far. It's between pensive songs about how she's feeling, how hard she's been working, and what she's prioritizing. And while I don't think that the hate that Doechii is experiencing and what Chappell is going through are one-to-one, I do see some common threads. I think due to hard times, struggles of the day-to-day, and the roughness that we're all forced to encounter on the regular, many are feeling really resentful, especially towards the rich, the wealthy, and the privileged. I also believe that we live in a time where so many of us feel powerless when our elected officials refuse to listen to us. And with that, how power is viewed seems to be skewed towards visibility, which is a whole different conversation. These algorithms shove celebrities down our faces. They get to have the good and soft life, and we don't. The growing class resentment leads to, I want to say, a low-key bloodthirsty attitude to those who transgress our internalized perception of these superstars. Pop singers, actors, streamers, whatever. Like, this woman is making a lot of money, right? And she has the nerve to complain about not having enough hours in the day? Like, what does she do? I mean, I'm struggling right now and she has the right to complain? This is where I feel like things get kind of interesting. We have a very odd and I'd say misplaced class resentment that kind of comes from a level of anonymity that we have on the internet. and accessibility we have to newly famous musicians. Like, they see our comments on our TikToks, their names and tags garner clicks. So in addition to actually producing work, being laborers who make and perform music, they are also becoming the discourse machines. Strange commodities or products folks can use within their online discourses to garner clout, attention, or whatever. And one thing I've noticed is that this mainly happens to women, which makes sense because we don't really value the labor of women in society in general. And God forbid a woman has a marginalized identity. So with that, do I feel like Chappell Roan communicates perfectly? Well, let's ask, what does that actually mean? Do we want artists to be vulnerable, to express burnout? Will we like another Britney Spears situation? I honestly feel like folks can have their own opinions and takes, but in exploring this, the opinions are always so extreme and vitriolic. And it happens across the board in different ways to different artists. So let's explore this real quick. The Doechii industry plant shit is weird because alternative hip hop listeners have seen her working and trying different things since 2019. And we live in a modern music economy that doesn't really have artist development anymore. So folks who make things have to shape and build their own sounds and aesthetics, which takes a lot of work on the back end. Only for the big labels to come in later and take a larger cut of the stuff that they made so that they can perform their music at scale. But again, I'm getting ahead of myself. With artists like a Doechii or a Chappell Roan, due to their algorithmic success, us seeing them atop our Spotify next up, or on the playlist, all the billboards, TikToks, podcasts, whatever, folks feel like these new faces are being forced upon us, and that they don't deserve the success that they've worked for. And with that, the hot take industrial complex just opens up around them, with a cavalcade of blank statements and nothing burgers that these folks have to say. Got an artist lamenting about their impending burnout on a podcast? Well, that must mean that they're done speaking out against the injustices in the world because she doesn't care, and actually, she's a fake lesbian. She's not even queer, but an awful capitalist using queer aesthetics to make herself famous. Oh, Doechii said that being straight is a red flag while joking around on a cute little clip? Well, she must hate men and want all men to jump into a black hole. Like, the level of seriousness folks attach to these off-the-cuff clips of these women is so weird because it's like y'all are on their nuts so hard. Like, they can just talk on a podcast or some shit without y'all dissecting every single word incorrectly. It's giving unhealthy cop-like behavior, but that's just what I'm feeling. Like, it's not that deep. And this weird obsession extends outside of easy targets like Chappell Roan. Like, people feel like it's easy to be weird and obsessively carceral to her because she's white and very popular. Doechii can be an easy target because honestly she's putting herself out there to be the artist with all the range, who wants to do boom bap experimental verses and hard hip hop cuts, or radio friendly pop songs. And with both of these artists, I see two women who are both creatively talented and that folks want to put them in very rigid boxes, with the very real extreme of this "you don't deserve your success" mindset manifesting in the weird hatred that Megan Thee Stallion experiences. Like, again, it's not a one-to-one comparison at all, but in 2021 and 22, folks were super comfortable complaining about seeing her everywhere, and once we actually saw what she went through with a certain roach-like human, everyone was so eager to hop on the hate train. Not because they enjoy Tori's music, but because they feel like this woman was undeserving of her success. But why?
You can't be a human being. You have to be a product that's being bought and sold and consumed, and you have to perceive yourself that way in order to function.
In February 2022, indie singer-songwriter Mitski took to Twitter to say the following.
Hello. I wanted to speak with you about phones at shows. They're part of our reality. I have mine on me all the time, and I'm not against taking photos at shows, though please no flash. But sometimes when I see people filming entire songs or whole sets, it makes me feel as though we are not here together. This goes for both when I'm on stage and when I'm an audience member at shows. I love shows for the feeling of connection, of sharing a dream, and remembering that we have a brief, miraculous moment of being alive at the same time before we part ways. I feel I'm part of something bigger. When I'm on stage and look at you, but you are gazing into a screen, it makes me feel as though those of us on stage are being taken from and consumed as content, instead of getting to share a moment with you. Ultimately, it's your night, and I want you to enjoy it as you like. I don't want to be greedy. I'm fortunate to get to play. Just putting out there that sometimes, if we're lucky, we can experience magic at a show, but only if we're there to catch it. Thank you for reading my woo-woo thoughts about shows. I just love and believe in them so much. And I want to share them fully with you. Thanks.
Now, this seems like a pretty normal request, that instead of centering shame and its concern, it's stressing the need for compassion, understanding, and connection. However, this somehow split the fan base, with some arguing that she's entitled, ableist, and judgmental, all for the simple request of, like, hey, maybe put your phone down for a little bit. And Mitski wasn't the first artist to bring this request to the table. Actually, there are tons of artists and comics who have a no-phone policy at their shows. So why the outrage? Mitski's work centers a raw, emotive approach with layered honesty regarding what she's going through. Her struggling to find love, feelings of inadequacy, or alienation makes her work the perfect fit for folks who are still figuring their things out, especially within their queer identity. And with that, by and large, her work becomes more of a commodity than a bridge for folks to come together. And a lot of that has to do with how we consume music. And to an extent, TikTok. Within a Marxist framework, quick shout out to Karl Marx, a commodity is something that is bought and sold or exchanged in a relationship of trade, where the complexity of Mitski's work becomes linked to a commodity, but instead of this being something you buy, like Taco Bell or laundry detergent, it's a vibe, feeling, and experience. TikTok, through shorthand communication culture, becomes a marketplace for said commodities by tying the layered and diverse feels of the work of a singer-songwriter to shorthand communication or expressions, meaning that this song can be a stand-in for folks. Instead of actually talking about being sad and feeling unloved or lonely, you can make a video to a Mitski song. And in this case, the work itself becomes less important. What is centered now is the vibe of the work that it satisfies. This kind of gets complicated with some of Mitski's work being about struggling with her feels of desirability, because that's rooted in her experience as an Asian woman in a society where whiteness is prioritized romantically, only for her music on certain social media platforms being synonymous with a very white, queer type of TikToker. Add to that, these were the fans coming after Mitski once she politely expressed a concern regarding her own live shows. I feel, as a working musician, this plays a huge role in how modern commodification intertwines with how we consume music, again with the shorthand communication leading the way there. The art itself is simplified and turned into a meme, and that becomes how we understand the artists themselves. Mitski isn't a songwriter with a diverse collection of interest. She's a lady who writes the sad songs. Another avenue for the individual to express their own personal woes and struggles. So her asking for something at her own shows from her audience transgresses that relationship, hence the vitriolic responses. Chappell Roan isn't a queer woman who expresses that through her work. She's a person whose brand is queerness, and that's why she's famous. And her not falling behind the blue team transgresses that relationship. I personally think a lot of folks are so alienated from the labor that goes into music that these individualistic outrage cycles or attention grabs become the only way that they know how to engage with art and culture. It's through discourse, shame, anger, and aggrieved entitlement, because the folks on these screens aren't workers. They are there to provide a service and shut up. It's very shut up and dribble coded, if we're being for real. You can see traces of this at the recent mic shows where instead of being present at the concert that they are attending, white hip hop heads use it as an opportunity to seek attention or center themselves by engaging in outlandish behavior. Like, I'm sure this is partially why Mitski isn't really on social media anymore. Mainly because she understands that by and large, she is a commodity, or that her works exist as a commodity. And as a private person, chooses not to engage with the constant or outrage cycles. Because so many folks, I'd say in America specifically, have a customer service relationship with art. And there's a huge empathy gap, with a knowledge of labor gap that goes along with it. Add to that, there's a normalization of parasocial relationships with these artists because their work helps the listener self-actualize. And since younger people grew up in a culture where surveillance is normalized, consumption must be moralized to an extent, meaning that if you like something or dislike something, it must be because this thing or this person or whatever is inherently good or bad. So in order to course correct for said consumption, when an artist messes up, it means that they must be a liar or an awful person. This gives them a level of control in said parasocial relationship so that they can regain agency by disliking the artist or person for moral reasons instead of just choosing to disengage. To an extent, since art and healthy art criticism were removed from our schools, these types of behaviors make sense to me. Americans by and large, as consumers, aren't really taught to dissect and appreciate art in a healthy and critical way. Unless you went to art school, which is extremely brutal. But the social space we share is built off of engagement, clicks, and algorithms that play off of our emotions to keep our eyes on the screen. So from these situations, I've learned that a lot of folks don't really know what working or traveling as a musician is like. So I decided to ask a few folks.
You got to start over.
Hi, my name is LaToya Kent. I am a co-owner of Cleveland Tapes with this person sitting with me. I perform in the band Mourning, BLKStar under my own name, LaToya Kent, and in the project Me You.
My name is R.A. Washington. I'm in all those projects that she just mentioned. And I do a bunch of shit with some of my homies. And I got some old friends I used to do punk shit with, but they had kids and they retired, and I'm still going.
My name is Jimmy Chitambo. My artist name is Anjimile. I do like singer-songwriter, indie folk music.
Sure, I'm April K. I'm a bass player, singer, songwriter, producer. I've been playing bass my whole life, but I really got the chance to do that on a music industry professional, LA level only in about 2022. I've been in the indie scene, DIY scene before that, but then my bass playing went viral on social media, and after that, that really gave me sort of like the connections and just the reach to access industry people to be able to work on a, again, like industry level. And so I have worked with a bunch of different brands doing kind of solo stuff, doing bass demos. Fender, I did a project where I fronted a band and brought together like a whole band for a project they did with a bunch of other bands where we had like Div, Julian Baker, and then the band that I put together and another artist all, putting on shows. And then I'm also in a band called Fever 333, and I joined that band, I think, late 2022. Started with touring with them, I think, early 2023. You might have to fact check that, but somewhere around there. And so I've toured pretty much the world. We do a lot in Europe. And then I play with other artists when I can. I just did Coachella with St. John, which was really cool. He's a rapper. So I love exploring different types of genres. The stuff I do on my own is very like pop rock inspired. Like I love pop music. Like I love just music of the people, music you can dance to, upbeat music. So really anything in that wheelhouse. But I'm often, in the alternative and rock space.
My name's Georgia Mack. I used to be in a band called Camp Cope when I was younger. And now I'm just Georgia Mack as my own thing now. I play music. I love learning instruments. I've been learning the banjo and the harmonica. I'm getting real, like, American in my music now.
My name is Elle Kempner. My project is called Palehound. I also have a project called Bachelor, and I am a guitarist and singer-songwriter.
My name is Matt. Or, Matthew, if I'm in trouble with my mum, Tong. I'm about to turn 46. I'm from Bournemouth, England. I currently reside in New York City. Been a working musician for getting on to 21 years now. My first assignment was as the drummer in moderately successful beat combo, Bloc Party. I also play drums in a band called Algiers, which you're a frequent collaborator, or sometime collaborator. I'm also a full-time parent, so luckily most of my day job is kind of on ice right now anyway, which is out of my hands, and we can shit talk off interview afterwards, Dante. But...
For sure.
I am Taja. I record and perform as Lorraine, and most often, and I'm also a curator and producer.
So like with I guess touring the world being like a semi like new experience, like over the past like 5 years experience for you, how physically demanding would you say it is?
Extremely. And this is actually a really important topic for me, especially when it comes to just the importance of healthcare accessibility in all professions, but I think especially musicians, where people see us on stage and enjoy it so much. And the whole point of a performance is to seem effortless and effortlessly cool. And like, I've been doing this my whole life, but the reality is, that's us performing. That's us putting on a show. Like, I don't know a single working musician who hasn't been injured on the job, who doesn't have, chronic back pain. People think of roadies as like, oh, they carry our stuff, we're divas. The reality is, like, after doing performance night after night, if I'm carrying my suitcase, my bass, and my bag, I've hurt my back from that pressure, that downward pressure, because I have the pressure of the bass, and then when I'm dancing, I'm kind of resisting that pressure of the bass, and so that's a lot of pressure just playing properly on the body, not to mention hours spent looking down, not to mention all of the editing. Content creation is something all musicians are expected to do, and I've made it a big part of my job. But my hands, one time, actually, it's so funny we're talking about this, because it was last year at some point, my hands got injured, and it was from a combination of touring, working on live projects, and also having to do content creation. I got a repetitive strain injury just from my fingers moving so much, and that makes you seem like a small thing, but try going a day without your hands. Like, it's my money makers, and I never fortunately had to take too much time away from playing, but I had to scale back significantly.
Yeah, touring is super physically demanding. I've been touring since I was like 19 years old. And it's been really intense the entire time. Like, we've never gotten to a point where we can afford a bus tour or something like that. So, it's a lot of like really long drives and sleeping on a different bed every night, or not sleeping on a bed. I mean, that beds every night has not been a guarantee until the past like 5 years of touring for me. But, I also have metal poles around my spine from a spinal fusion surgery I had when I was 12. And that is just like, at the end of every day on tour, like, I am in a lot of pain. And it sucks, because it's like, something that I worry as I get older is like not sustainable, even though it's the thing that I love to do. And it is just an unavoidable part of touring at the level that I'm at.
It definitely depends on like what level of touring you're at. Like, it is like physically demanding, but people who have like more money are definitely more comfortable, like if they're on like a tour bus or like a private jet, or staying in really nice hotels, compared to like if you're like in a car or a van and you're like driving every day to get to a new city and staying in really cheap hotels and maybe not eating that well because it's like too expensive to like the class that you're at definitely like dictates how comfortable touring is for you.
It's kind of like sitting, in a lot of ways it kind of like mirrors like an office job, because you're like either sitting in a bus or like sitting on a plane or sitting in a some kind of moving vehicle, which people don't really talk about as much. It's also hard to get fresh food on the road, and also just like the emotional parts of touring, I feel like end up having like physical repercussions. Where like, I don't know, when you're touring certain parts of the country or globe, really, like when you're kind of like looking over your shoulder or like worried about your stuff getting stolen or someone being hateful toward you or whatever, but that also like kind of that kind of like heightened emotional state also has like physical, it manifests physically.
The thing that's draining is if you don't take care of your mental and create a routine during the thing, you can pretty much go off the rails and eat the wrong stuff or not get enough sleep and not drink enough water. And then that compounds a lot faster on the road than it does at home. So I would say it's a balance.
The mental health part of it too. So you're separated from your bed and you're separated from whoever you're in proximity with when you're home. So that's a big thing. But also on the physical body side of things, depending on how the travel is happening, if you're in a van like we usually travel, you're kind of in a tight spot. So you're kind of sleeping in that spot and you're maybe a little cramped up. That part can have its physical downsides. Making sure that you eat properly. I have a pretty strict vegetarian diet, so sometimes finding the right foods on the road are a thing, and the loading and unloading every night, all of those things, your bag, and but all of the beautiful parts of sharing your music kind of take the pains away.
How physically demanding touring is, it really depends if you're a drummer or like just a lead singer who doesn't play anything. No, I'm joking, of course. I mean, I suppose I could speak to a few experiences of that, because I've done it. I've done arena tours and I've done van tours, sleeping on floors, sharing beds in motels. In fact, I've done more of the latter, I think, at this point than the former. It's fucking really exhausting. It's extremely tiring, and I began my work in a paradigm where the bulk of your income was from live performance. We can get into how that's actually become less sustainable in a minute, but when I started, I think the expectation was that you would never, it didn't really matter how successful you could potentially be, you were never really going to make a huge amount of money on record sales, and thus, you had to keep yourself on the road. And, in Bloc Party, I think with Silent Alarm, there's a fan website that you can access on the Internet Archive that has a gigography, and I think that year 2005 I was home for about maybe a total of 2 months, and we did about 165 shows that year, and it kind of doesn't, we began that year touring in a van, and we finished in a tour bus. But it doesn't really matter that you have access to a bed to sleep in, whenever you have any downtime, because you are constantly having to adapt to new surroundings every day. You're in a new venue. There's a new local crew to acquaint yourself with. You have to reorientate yourself, within the venue, just to access your dressing room and wherever you're going to shower or hang out for the rest of the day. Based on my own experience in Bloc Party, which we did pretty well for a bit. So we were on TV and radio, and there were a lot of press engagement. So it wasn't like you can wake up whenever and just sort of roll into the venue and play a gig. You are usually up and being driven to a radio station or a record signing, or maybe some other kind of meet or greet, or some kind of promotional commitment that in which you're expected to be somewhat presentable, somewhat sober, and somewhat alert, and somewhat wakeful. But when you're kind of getting onto your second month of being on the road, that's quite difficult as well. So I mean, you are usually working every day, but I think it doesn't matter how many people are kind of looking after you, or handling your affairs. There's still a psychological toll that's exacted, because you kind of have to be on it the whole time. You've got to make sure you don't piss off your handlers or bend some noses out of joint, because sometimes when you've been away for so long and you're tired, you don't wake up in the best mood.
Yeah.
And you're kind of you get to the point where you're sick of the sound of your own voice, let alone those of your bandmates. You're also dealing with intra-band politics, and you're dealing with crew politics as well, and quite often when you have a crew of more than 5 people, there's even more fighting and disagreement to contend with that is actually nothing to do with you, but everything still has to go smoothly, because if they're not able to do their jobs to their best of their abilities, then you can't either, and then there is this weird symbiosis. So that, yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on, and moreover, sleeping in a tour bus doesn't really feel like sleep, because you don't know if you can barely tell if you're awake or asleep half the time. You just don't know. You put your little coffin, you draw the curtain, and the bus is moving. So luckily I'm quite a heavy sleeper, but a couple of my bandmates at the time were not, and would just never seen that rested at all.
Do you think the music industry is fair to artists, and if not, why?
Absolutely not. I feel like it's been hard to put the words to that, especially as like the technology is so ever changing. Like, I feel like I don't have like a straightforward answer to how the music industry is unfair to artists, because it's just like, it's an ever changing answer to that question with like the new developments of streaming, of like AI, of stuff like that. But something that someone said recently that really resonated with me is that the music industry is a pyramid scheme, and musicians are at the bottom. And I was like, holy shit, that's so true. That's just, yeah, that's how I feel.
I just moved to LA at the end of last year, and I learned the harshest lesson. I told you, I've been in music my whole life. I've been playing indie scene, I've been playing jazz. And I'll admit this, I'm okay to say this in the public, I've never done a splits agreement, because I always just give people the stuff. I'm like, just have it. Like, it's because most of my income comes from touring and from social media, and so like I'm happy to contribute to people's projects, and so I never really took the time to understand it. And what I learned is I actually have a background in finance and economics. I studied it in college, and I actually had a job on Wall Street right after. I was only there for a couple months, but I had been there interning and stuff before, so I know a lot about finance and money and the way things work. And I learned in the past 6 months that songs are treated like an asset, like a stock. And so when we see an artist, for example, perform a song on SNL, they're probably performing it to increase the value of that asset, because songs are owned just like a stock is owned, just like a company's owned, just like the best example I can think of as a stock or a company. It's something that holds value, right? And so people want your song to be more expensive. So if I'm an artist, say me, let's just go this way, April K, I go play a song on SNL. Now, when Target wants to use my song in their commercial, I can charge more, When I go play my song on the Super Bowl, now when McDonald's wants to use it, I can charge more, I can even probably work out a better deal with Spotify, like I can leverage that in so many ways. And so that doesn't, and this is where, I get back to the answer to your question, is it fair to artists? The way that the industry works is the artist will get some share of that, right? Some basically owns one stock in the company. So if you see a song as a company, right? And you and I work on it together. Now you own 50% of the company and I own 50%. Yes, there's master and there's songwriting, but we don't need to, for the sake of non-music industry people, that's irrelevant. Just, it's divided up between several people. And so that's why when Taylor Swift re-recorded all her songs, she basically got a bigger piece of the pie. Sure. And so the question is, right, is that system fair, right? I can't speak to that. And so I wanted to say all of that because I cannot speak to that, because I've never been in those deals, and I think it's really deal to deal. Chappell Roan says she has one of the best deals in the industry, and I believe her. So I think she has a situation where the company that is her given songs is going to be benefiting her the most if it does well. But what I do think is unfair is all the people left out of that, right? And I think that the reality is, because artists, Chappell Roan, I don't know if she's a great example here, but because artists are being squeezed so much by their labels, and I think by these touring conglomerates, and by the way live music is now, where small artists are having less and less access to even be able to get into these spaces, there just isn't the funds to really pay touring musicians and to provide insurance and to make the quality of life and the labor standards. I think that's I'm kind of thinking out loud now, but really there isn't the resources and also I think the culture, but I think it connects back to the resources to provide good workplace standards for everybody. And sometimes that does include the artist, you know. It's tough. And as far as the way deals are structured in terms of, you know, artists getting advances and things like that, you know, it seems like a lot of people really lose in that system.
Yeah.
And it seems like there are a lot of times that folks sign deals and they are already promising so much to a label, but the label doesn't deliver. And I've seen so many people's lives be, I don't know if I'd say ruined, but I've seen like people lose their hope and love of music or belief in the ability to move in this industry through having someone lift their hopes up this high and then just let them fall down, you know, and that is heartbreaking. As far as fairness, I don't know. It's like, that's how deals are structured. Like it is what it is in terms of the structure. Ideally, there'd be a completely different structure, but we've been working in this one for forever. So I don't know. I really don't know in terms of, you know, is this structure fair or not? I know a lot of people lose. I know a lot of people are hurt. And I do know that there's definitely not enough resources given. Yeah, that's what I can say. So I'd say, I can't fully say it's unfair, but I do think there are losers, people who lose through this, and people who win without necessarily taking as big of risks. So I guess that's unfair. I guess that's the definition of unfair. The winners have an unfair advantage.
No, I do not. I don't think any industry is fair to the laborer. And so, I mean, not to get all talking about capitalism here, but capitalism protects private property in the interests of businesses, not the interests of laborers, or I guess in this context, artists. So yeah, no, of course the music industry is not fair towards artists. Like any industry, it is geared towards the perpetuation and growth of business at the expense of laborers. Like, there's a wealthy few, like as usual.
Which is wild.
Yeah, I think, yeah. There's plenty of shit I'd like people to know about touring that I actually don't think I can say in public. So I'm not going to. Yeah. Would not be appropriate to say in public.
Real.
So, yeah. It's a damn shame.
I feel like I sometimes have like a little bit of a weird answer to this, which is that like I like spent my whole life organizing around art and art making in a lot of different ways, but I also don't think that like when it comes to labor, I feel like sometimes not when it comes to labor, but in general, I feel like sometimes artists can be like singled out as like art as like a unique like class of people that need support, but I think sometimes there are like missed opportunities to like connect artists with other types of laborers, which is I think exactly what you're trying to do in this article.
Mm-hmm.
But like I guess by saying that I'm saying that like sometimes I feel like it can be a missed opportunity to zero in on artists, that like oftentimes it's also like the artists on stage are thought about, but also it's like deeper than that, because like artists have jobs and like artists are often the people like running sound at the venues and are like the staff like that are like accompanying artists on tour, and it's like way deeper than that. So like when we're talking about like the industry being unfair to artists, it's just like it's not just it's not just the primary artist, it's like everyone involved actually.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a much there's just like a lot to talk about there then, because it's not it's just I try to be like inclusive of as many like types of artists as I can. I don't know if I'm answering the question, but
oh, you're great.
But no, I don't think it's fair. But I don't think it's like just like an artist issue. It is like a like generally thinking about like how we like take care of people issue.
That is real. It's like a general labor issue.
Yeah, exactly.
And you better just take it and just fucking sit down and shut up and, like, you know, do what you're told and not question anything, because it's supposed to be the best thing ever. And it you know, whilst it absolutely can be quite an incredible experience, and you know, I'm sitting here talking as someone who does have a deep sense of gratitude for the life it's afforded me. You're not there's this, you know, you're supposed to make this sort of tacit agreement that you're not allowed to speak about it as work, because then it just makes life seem miserable for everyone else, you know. And I think the industry really exploits that for sure. And to the extent that even a few minor tweaks aren't even considered. And one thing I've been thinking about a lot over the last few years is how for the most part you never get a really insightful and grounding talk from your handlers at the start of it. Like, I don't think I've ever spoken to anyone who got taken on by management, a manager or a management company or a record company, and was sat down by you know, an A&R person or a manager or anyone else, a booking agent, or, you know, someone who should have a real fucking responsibility for their charges, and you know, and had a conversation where this person who holds all the powers says, look, your life is going to really be upended. We don't know what's going to happen with you guys. Well, you know, here are the opportunities you have, do the work, and let's see what happens. But like, your life will be upended one way or another. You're not going to be at home. You're not going to be at home for months at a stretch, and you will grow tired of each other, and you won't have a huge amount of recourse in the middle of a tour to deal with that stuff. But just know that, you know, here is just the people that we work with, X, Y, and Z, who could help you, you know, if your mental health is beginning to decline, and if you are feeling exhausted, or, you know, maybe you guys could give us a list of your non-negotiables, right? Like, what's the limit for you? Like, at what point do you feel comfortable saying this is too much? Can we have a break, or can we reimagine how we approach this? But like, it just seems so infrequent that anyone ever feels like they have the opportunity to flag this stuff with, you know, their handlers. And yeah, the fact that, you know, you're just not really told to expect that it could actually be really exhausting and alienating, and something that really takes you away from the world that you once knew. That you actually essentially are making some kind of deal with the devil, where you don't get to see your family or your friends or the people who knew you before that all happened in the first place. And moreover, that, you know, I also feel like because of that, it is actually so hard to find solidarity amongst other musicians, because you're all being forced to work so hard and take whatever opportunity you're given, that you know, you very rarely have time to actually kick back with other people who might not be intimately involved with your own project, and actually kind of share ideas, or you know, share support on how you know, dehumanizing some of the work can be sometimes.
That is amazing and intense, and like exactly what I was kind of getting at specifically. So with that, is that like the main dissonance you feel like with people, with what you experience versus like what the life is actually like?
Yeah, because it's weird. You say that you're a musician, or like, you know, in my case, there was a very brief period where I was starting to get recognized by complete strangers, which freaked me the fuck out, because, you know, I look a bit more wayward now, but I was extremely preppy and like nerdy back then. You know, I looked like a no disrespect to geography teachers, but like quite often people just assumed I was a geography teacher, and it's like it's really weird that this switch flips, and then like people are like, "Oh, you're a rock star," and they completely forget like what your presentation and your demeanor is like. So they have this completely completely different idea about you, and it's like, whoa, that's weird. I haven't done anything to change how I am or how I present, and now people are like, whoa, yeah, this fucking party, you must be having the best time ever. Like, this is brilliant. Wow, you're a fucking musician, isn't it cool? Like, well, tell me about all the crazy shit you do. I'm like, I don't know, I just fucking I just had to rent a carpet cleaner because my flat smells a bit weird. But it's this expectation or this fantasy that's projected onto the work. I mean, obviously, yes, you have more access to another world that some people can only dream of or imagine. But you know, the other thing is if you're not a complete dickhead, then actually what you quickly realize is that stuff is just built on a fucking house of cards, and it's empty. It's completely empty. I mean, I remember finally getting an invite to Bungalow 8, which was, I don't know if you'll recall, but Bungalow 8 was a chain of middle, like kind of indie sleaze era nightclubs that opened up. There was one in London, there was definitely one in New York. I don't know if they kind of branched out to LA or other places, but for about 5 minutes, that was the place everyone went to, and it was always written about like it was Studio fucking 54. And I was always wondering what it was like, and I went one time, and it was the most empty. It was the emptiest, like, most miserable experience I think I had. You know, at that particular time, I was just sitting there thinking, why am I like nothing's happening? It's just a bunch of people sitting around, like, and I think quite a few of these people seem to be going off to the bathroom on quite regular occasions, and it was like really quiet and just sad. Yeah. And I was like, yeah, okay, this is fucking. Everyone likes to assign their own particular like gate of heaven for a particular period in time, and like for a brief period it was this fucking place, and you know, obviously so much of it was just built up on the nightclub's own like PR and hype, and the way that works with publicists and you know, celebrities. I'm using apostrophes because I never considered myself as that. But and I don't think most people didn't either, so that's fine. But yeah, you know, the myth of like the musician or the rock star musician like having this kind of wild life is largely a fabrication. And you know, and I still say it, and I've always said it, like, you don't need to be making music for a living to live like that. Fucking hell, like, you know, do you know what I mean? Like, any idiot can like find a dealer and like go to any, you know, plow all their money to go into whatever nightclub and chase folk around and just be a complete maniac. Like, you don't have to be a musician to do that. So I was always kind of like, what is this exactly?
Yeah.
I think what I wish people knew is that you actually have to work really, really hard to find any form of consensus amongst the people you're out on the road with, and to find any solid, you know, anything that feels like solidarity with fellow musicians, because it is actually quite a lonely experience for the most part. And like, and then, you know, having been in a band that was in the public eye a bit more, I found it lonely and alienating, and I wasn't the focal point. I was a drummer in that band. I wasn't even you know, I wasn't a singer, you know, and I think that the person who is the foil for all that attention is even more alienated, because you're completely trapped. You're stuck inside this world that you help generate, but then you basically have no control over once it gets going.
Yeah,
I guess it depends on how you're moving. So if you are an independent artist or an artist that doesn't have a label, then you might have some wiggle room as far as like how much you can make or the type of moves that you can make. I have friends that are signed to major labels that don't have money to eat, and so some of those things are unfair because you put so much energy into this art and then you're not able to survive and take care of yourself. So some of those things are the kind of the umbrella that I think about on a regular basis is the fairness of wage, like how much an artist is paid, and the care that is taken for them in order for them to have to live and make art and not starve and have a place to stay.
The fairness aspect kind of mirrors the rest of the society and how it does labor. So just because it's art doesn't mean it doesn't operate under the same physics of exploitation and kind of like bad pay and bad conditions. So it can mirrors, anything in capitalism mirrors itself. And but it's interesting because what we deem as success in art is often things that don't have a wage. They're like cultural currency parts, but that cultural currency and what it means everywhere is starting to break down to the point where it doesn't mean the same things everywhere. And younger generations are being like, well, I'm sorry, that ain't enough. And we appreciate that step forward because every generation, I think, adds to that discussion of trying to get something fair and equitable. But yeah, until like the grocer is getting paid a living wage, the artist damn sure is not going to get paid a living wage.
Yeah, I think about that in terms of like how people frame success, or like sometimes I'm like surprised. I'm surprised on all ends. People either think I'm like way more successful. They mostly think I'm way more successful than I am, and like what success equals to them is like maybe not represented financially or in other ways. So I'm like, I wonder what that is actually then that they're like equating success with, right? Like, yeah, it's just interesting to understand like what those metrics are for like a lay person that isn't an artist.
That's right.
And also just from like knowing people and touring with people and having friends that are like, you know, just have a much bigger fan base than I do, understanding that like they're going through like most of the same issues that I am, like doesn't make me feel great because there's nothing to aspire to, you know?
Yeah.
And that makes me sad.
I think a little bit. I think the dissonance is just like for example, I don't play as many shows as I used to, because I don't feel like it, because I don't want to carry my gear to like a random gig that may or may not have sound anymore.
Wow. Yeah.
You know, when the pandemic, like at the height of the pandemic in 2020, everything was shut down in Boston, and I was like, you know what? Actually, I don't miss carrying my fucking shit all over town. Shit's heavy, and I don't know. I just don't think I need to be on stage that much. So I think maybe some people assume, like, as an artist, I think people tend to assume, like, I live for the stage, and I, like, love performing. And it's not that I do love performing, but I don't need it. Like, touring is a hopefully income generating activity for me. It's not like a fun thing I'm gonna go do for shits and giggles. And I think people who aren't musicians are like, oh, you're just going on tour like for fun? You're just gonna go like hang out? It's like, I mean, it's kind of fun, yes, but it's also not fun. Yeah.
They're pretty shocked usually, like people who are not in music, when they hear what like touring is actually like band touring. You know, it's not glamorous. It's not, you know, it's not especially even lucrative unless you're like selling out like, you know, pretty big venues. And that's the other thing I don't think they understand. I think it's kind of like, wow, you're so lucky. A lot of things people are like, you're so lucky to do this. And it's true. I feel so lucky still, regardless of all of this, to get to do what I do and travel and explore and play music. But it's also labor. And, you know, like I've said this before, but the older I get, the more I'm like, wow, like how sustainable is this labor? You know, like I've seen these cities, I've done these, played these shows, and like, how do I continue as a career, you know?
Yeah.
A million other things, just trying to like get my head screwed on tight and figure out what time zone I'm in, you know what I mean? And so for me, what happens on stage very much does not translate like to off stage. And I think it's great for the brand, you know, when you get the tour bus videos and everyone's chilling and whatever, the MTV Cribs type thing, like it's great for your personal brand to look like, oh yes, I'm that cool all the time. But that's not, it takes so much work to put a show like that together. Like we see these amazing Super Bowl performances. We don't see all of the times people miss the steps. We don't see people's toes bleeding. You know, we don't see people coughing. Every time I play a festival, Coachella included, everyone is like wheezing and coughing up dust after, like just like the people in the festival who are coughing up dust, we do too. Y'all just don't see it. That's a great example. I think the dust coughing analogy really like summarizes kind of like we're all coughing up dust. You just don't see us because we can't cough on stage because I'm not trying to have a photo of me out there like on you know, in the background of the artist. You know what I mean?
Now it's all streaming, and the big streaming platforms just aren't very artist friendly. So like people who have like X amount of monthly listeners on Spotify still can't make a living off of that. And yeah, I think that, what do I think? I don't know. I feel like it's often the people behind the scenes are often making more money than the artists are, which is kind of crazy because it's like it's their art, and like they're the musicians and they're writing the songs that are connecting with people, and you know, like, so it's like, why is some guy sending emails making more money?
Afraid to say this. This is my official public disclosure of this information. So we did 2 weeks with Coachella. The first weekend, it was basically the conditions you described, like 105. You know, who knows what it was on the stage with all the heat from the gear, and we were in kind of an enclosed area, so it was not as much sun, but it kept the heat in. And I was doing 4 songs, and then they did a couple without me, and then I had 2 songs and I had 1 song. I missed the first weekend of Coachella. I missed that last song because I was vomiting the whole song backstage because it came together really quickly. I was teching for myself. It was hot. So I'd been running around for 2 hours in my stage clothes. This is all my decision, you know, mind you. Like, this is just, it was 100 degrees. I was running around in my stage clothes. And at the end of song 3, I was like, ran off. And I've gotten a little nauseous on stage before from motion sickness, but it's never been like this because it's never been that crazy of weather conditions. And I was sick for a whole song. And when I told people, even the people on stage with me, they were like, I had no idea. They're like, I have no idea. Yeah. And I was like, girl, I was lunch, dinner, and breakfast was out like 5 minutes just over a railing. And then I walked back out there like work, dancing, like smiling, like nothing ever happened 3 weeks ago.
Just, I wish that people knew just how, like, you know, I think like something that people see is like, oh, streams and press, like very forward facing, like Instagram-y, like indicators of success actually mean nothing. Because people are always like, oh, you were like Rolling Stones, whatever, and you were like the top, like, you know, whatever of this. And like people like will cite press bits and streams and stuff like that. And it is impressive, you know, sure, but it's not actually leading to security or stability at all. And those things are like so disconnected.
How much it's about the process and like liking the making of the things, and really a commitment to that process as earnest as I could be. And that's like I would hope that's getting communicated. The older I get, the more I think I get better at doing that and kind of showing the joy part, because it's an honor to have like creativity, but it's not like it's not hierarchical. It's actually like it's more like being somebody that boils soup, and you got to pass out the soup, and you got to be there because it's like 8 a.m. people looking for that morning soup, and you are the morning soup person, and you just need to do it. And like, so Yeah, I'm hoping that gets communicated more.
I wish people knew that it wasn't so glamorous, and that feels very basic. And like, not that it's also not something to be grateful for, but so much of it is like, you know, making spreadsheets. And like, it's to me, I also, because I work as a curator, it just feels like the other side of like the work that I do so much, or like a lot of the work that I do as a curator is like directly directly relates to skills that I learned being an artist. And you know, that's like an office job where, I mean, kind of like in a lot of ways, and that it's not just like, there's like so many skills that go into it that isn't just like, and now you get to like sit and create and wait for the moment of like of inspiration. It's like, no, you have a deadline and you have like, you know, 2 days to make this demo for this very specific thing, or you have a show that's coming up at this very specific time, and like you have a very specific budget, so how many people can you play with? It's like, you know, lots of puzzles like that you have to figure out.
And I swear I still am learning this today. Like I said, I learned 6 months ago how splits work. And that, again, like if I want to get into the Grammy Academy, you need to have a certain amount of credits, which probably means that I should have been asking for splits just so I could get the credits. But also, do I want to be in the Grammy Academy? But even to have access, maybe I should, because then that way, maybe and I just thought if I work really hard, play shows, promote myself on social media, I could build a following, and I can, you know, you cannot reach celebrity numbers of streams without that access. And it doesn't mean what people say, you press a button and you're famous. Like, people have to work hard. That doesn't downplay hard work, but I wish I knew that, because it would have really changed how I approached things, and I would have had just more realistic hopes and dreams. I do feel like misled. I do feel like the marketing and the myth of like, they got discovered and then they popped up organically without thinking about all the strings that were being pulled. I do feel misled by that as an artist, and I do think it makes me behind, because in terms of achieving all of those goals, I'm starting fresh. Like, I don't have experience from when I was a child of being in these spaces, and that's fine. I mean, and that's, you know, and I do think also, even for me, that I will say has a lot to do with geography as much as anything else. I'm from Texas originally, and that's not Austin. Austin was you play. And in Austin, like, it's a very much a guitar town. And so as a bass player, it's like your chops, and like, can you know, get on stage, and can you execute the song, and can you play? And like, that would get you more shows. And so in my mind, I was like, and then that translates to Britney Spears somehow, but it doesn't really. You have to be kind of in this specific path that really isn't available, and most people don't even know about, because it's boring. It's so much more interesting to think someone was plucked off like a prairie somewhere than all of the people in suits behind computers really making things run and helping people discover music and get access to music.
Through all these searches and questioning, attempts to connect with the concerns many had about the statements of Chappell Roan, a certain term kept being thrown around: white feminism. Chappell Roan refusing to stand up for queer rights, even though she shared her political opinions in the past, seems to be the beacon of quote-unquote white feminism. But what does that actually mean? Like, I feel like we're in such a dry space with the watering down of terms, throwing out buzzwords, etc., that we don't really examine what these terms mean or where they come from. And when we do use these terms, I feel like we're attempting to equivocate harm in a way that protects our scenes, movements, and identities. If only there was another pop star whose actions consistently align in a way that exemplifies white feminism.
And it's about this wonderful world that we see right out there and appreciating it. This is all for the benefit of Earth.
White or liberal feminism refers to a type of feminism that focuses exclusively on white middle-class women and prioritizes issues that primarily affect them. It's also referred to as girl boss feminism, as the focus tends to be on equality and empowerment gained through capitalist means. For example, calling for an increase in the number of female CEOs and the growing hustle culture trend. It's a feminism that prioritizes achieving equality for white women, insisting that their equality will open up doors for all other women. White feminism is also closely related to white fragility, and the structure of innocence, where a person may feel a sense of discomfort or defensiveness when confronted with issues around racism. When viewing the world through the prism of white feminism, many women may not even be actively aware that the feminism that they're subscribed to is exclusionary to so many others.
Now, this differs from the intersectional feminist framework that we're currently using, with intersectionality referring to the relationship that multiple factors like race, class, gender, sexual identity, and ability, amongst other things, interact with one's individual experience with systemic oppression and disadvantage or advantage. Originally coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, a civil rights advocate and critical race scholar, but it's also a framework used in a lot of the works of Bell Hooks, who spent a lot of time exploring how Black and brown men are affected by oppressive systems in a bunch of books that some of y'all refuse to read. And now it's finally time to discuss Katy Perry. First off, while I don't identify as a man, I present as a masked person, and two other YouTube creators, I spent a decent amount of time covering her.
Asked for a sign from the heavens, from my angels, and they're like, well, here's the feather, which is what your mother calls you, and if that's not enough, the capsule's named Tortoise, which is your second nickname that your mother calls you. And I'm like, okay, I'm going. Yeah. I got the message, and I'm gonna get the message.
Feminism in a more exhaustive fashion. So I'd recommend watching their stuff. Shout out to For Harriet, the channel that got me into video essays, and Mooncat After Dark, or Mooncat. I'll leave their videos in the description below. The long list of hollow feminist cringe is deep with her, embarrassing and to a certain extent selfish and misogynistic. Be it her collaborating with Dr. Luke, a person who's got a few hits under his belt, but is mostly known right now for being an alleged rapist, to her evicting the elderly, and her recent trip to space that caused extensive environmental damage and cost a lot of money, all at a time where most Americans can't even afford eggs. But remember, she did this for feminism. You see, white feminism isn't concerned with saying the wrong thing or representing every group effectively. It's not attempting to hold our elected officials accountable. No, not at all. It purely suggests that the very act of a woman, usually a white woman, doing anything is in itself feminist. Fuck solidarity, or if those actions are harmful. It's less concerned with healthcare for folks in the industry that they work in or offering platforms to marginalized people. No, it's to an extent an individualistic endeavor. And we see this on full display in Katy Perry's very strange, seemingly AI-generated music video, Woman's World. One part satire, I guess, another part attempted pro-American content slop. This vid does very little to actually say anything at all, with the imagery playing into strange, vague sexual stereotypes and whatever this is, to marry image consumption with some very unaware form of comedy that spends more time actually making fun of women than doing anything else. Like, in all honesty, it looks like something that a Redditor who complains about a lack of cleavage in video games conceptualized and directed. Upon returning from space, all Katy Perry could remark was,
it is the highest high, and it is surrender to the unknown, trust, and this whole journey is not just about going to space. It's the training, it's the team, it's the whole thing. I couldn't recommend this experience more. This is like up there with all the, different tools that I've learned in my life, from meditation to the Hoffman process. This is up there because what you're doing is you're like really finding the love for yourself, because you got to trust in yourself on this journey. And then you're feeling the love when you come down, for sure. And you're feeling that strength. So I feel really connected to that strong, divine feminine right now.
Knowing that this experience cost at least $100,000, I don't think it's as accessible as she thinks it is. But that's the point of white feminism. It's not about building a path forward. It's about self-empowerment through an individual lens. It's not concerned with saying the right thing or making sure folks are represented in a way that bridges the gap of accessibility. It's frivolous, self-aggrandizing, vapid, out of touch, exclusive, so many other things. So with all that said, when Chappell Roan said what she did, are we leaning too much into a reactionary sentiment around a person experiencing the early stage of burnout? Are we watching as we, as a society of consumers, lose the ability to decipher between someone talking off the cuff and someone taking a firm political stand? Are we admitting to ourselves that art should be a product formed and manicured to our consumer perfectionist lens? Are we the weird internet bullies from that strange episode of Black Mirror? I honestly don't know. But what I do know is this. Through the continued violence perpetrated by a certain settler state, it's made very active attempts to link the actions of that settler society, the one bombing and destroying people's land, families, and kids, like it's made this link to its very actions through its symbology to Judaism. I thankfully know many folks who work against that narrative and see that as an attack on their Jewish heritage. In the way that so many people are behaving around this current election discourse, especially black and brown and queer folks, I'm really hoping that we don't misuse our ability to discuss these structures of oppression, misuse these frameworks that exploit everybody, and including to black and brown people and queer folks, as a way to black excellence or girl boss our way into powerful positions. Positions that make us the ones perpetuating oppression abroad. My fear is that so many of us have kind of lost the plot in how we speak about this past election, that we fail to understand the true stakes of the time that we're living in. And I'm honestly hoping that we can regain composure and compassion to stop wasting time funneling so much of our time in supposed political phrasing and spend more energy examining material political action. Maybe then we can finally truly see who our real enemies are. But that's just my take. Did you hate this video? Let me know. I'll be posting more soon. Mostly more lighthearted stuff, kinda. Thinking of doing a longer video about Donald Glover soon. Let me know what you think of that. And if you saw another video talking about how Chappell Roan is the worst, feel free to tag that person and let them know that you saw this video too. I'm kidding. Don't do that. But if you made it this far, drop a dolphin emoji and your thoughts on the content of this video. Also, I'm touring, so catch me at these dates. And if you want to support the vision, you can always join my Patreon, where you get stuff like this early, your name in the credits, exclusive stuff like full interviews with my lovely friends, and performance footage. So yeah, that's all I have to say. With that, peace.
And putting it out and stuff is a crazy choice. Fuck, I don't even know. I don't know what I want people to know. That was a dumb answer. It wasn't a dumb answer, but like...
It was a great answer. There's so many variables, I think.
Yeah, like it's not easy. But at the same time, it is easy. Like it's easy to just like make some music. Who cares? And like it's not easy to like get up at 5 and go work 8 hours and, you know, like... Well, whatever. But yeah, sometimes I get embarrassed being a musician because I'm like, ugh, this is like stuff that I've made. I'm gonna put it out. I'm gonna hope you like it. Because like you put it out and you hope you hope people are gonna like it. And yeah, it's a lot more embarrassing than people think. Maybe that's what I want people to know. But maybe that's just me. I get embarrassed like going on dates. I get embarrassed waiting in lines because I'm like, everyone knows that I want to go into this and I'm willing to wait in a line for it. I'm embarrassed. But I get embarrassed about everything, so it's fine.